We all have different stories to tell about last year, and I feel like it was a rough year for many. But I got to meet a lot of really cool people. I got to spend time with nature-loving gardeners, and I had so many people supporting me as I got started, people volunteering time and nursery pots and seedlings they dug up out of their yard, seeds they rescued from, birds or whatever. And then also people helping me get the word out. And I also had support from some native plant nursery owners, especially Ed at Riverside Natives and Gail at Natives in Harmony. So I just want to plug them too, because they do an amazing job and they really care about the movement. So this past year's been weird and hard and at times overwhelming, but also just amazing and a lot of fun. So as I'm talking to all these people, I realized I joined a native plant movement that seems like it was started, at least in large part, by Douglas Tallamy. And for those of you who aren't familiar with him, he's a professor in the Department of Entomology and Wildlife Ecology at the University of Delaware. And he currently has 4 published books and lots of great YouTube videos for sharing. I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say, ever since I read his book, I've started going native in my yard. And that's basically why I started the nursery. I read Bringing Nature Home, his first book, in late 2019. And I wish I'd read it in 2007 when it was first published, because I've made a lot of questionable choices in my gardening prior to his books. And if you haven't read any of Tallamy's books, I highly caution you not to read them at bedtime. You will be up at 3 a.m. planting oak trees or starting a native plant nursery. And so I just want to say up front that even though I'm not an expert, I do want to come to you from a little bit of where my expertise does lie, which is as a natural healthcare practitioner. I'm a naturopath, and my expertise is in helping people to recover from environmental illnesses. And I've been doing that for over 20 years. A naturopath is a type of natural healthcare practitioner. And what I'm seeing in my practice and in my personal life, just with friends, is that we are becoming an indoor society, and it's really, really bad for us. And from what I'm seeing as well, nature's fate and our fate are definitely intertwined. So the need to garden for wildlife isn't only critical for wildlife, it's actually critical for us, and not just in our own yards. We all need to go out and infect as many people as we can, not with COVID, but with native plantitis. Now, I know we all only have so much bandwidth for negative or depressing information, so I will keep that to a minimum, only enough to make my case, but I do need to include a few things. So something I've been hearing about for years is that scientists say we're in the 6th extinction. Extinctions are mass dying events where most of life on Earth dies out. That's happened 5 other times in the fossil record in the past 500 million years. And if you look, you can see on the slide here that extinctions usually take a long time. So here's 10 million years, a little less than 3 million years. The Permian was unknown. Triassic was 3 to 4 million years. The other one's less than a million years. But basically right now, we're in the 6th mass extinction. It's already underway. And we're losing species right now at 10,000 times the rate of past extinctions. And actually amphibians, we're losing them at 45,000 times the rate. And there's a reason why they're particularly vulnerable, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. And you can see along the bottom of this picture that the broken line is basically the usual rate of extinction. So you can see it kind of stays almost flat, but our current rate is on an upward swing, and it's following the increase in human populations. And I think that's not a coincidence. Our human population has tripled since 1950, actually more than tripled. And scientists do believe that these are related, and that's why they call this the Anthropocene. And Anthropocene comes from the word anthropogenic, which means that humans are impacting nature. And this is, habitat loss is probably one of the biggest things that's happening right now. And you can see basically how our land is allocated across the United States. Look how much is cow pasture and cow range, livestock feed for those cows, food that we eat. So we take up so much of that just in providing food for ourselves. Only 5% of our land in the United States is permanently protected as wilderness, and half of that 5% is in Alaska. And we've all seen what our country looks like from an airplane. This is what a lot of our country looks like. Pockets of habitat that do remain are separated from each other by asphalt, buildings, fields of monoculture crops, and the most wasteful of those is grass. We're going to talk about that too. And because much of wildlife is migratory, it needs continuous connected habitat in order to thrive. If we build habitat back into our yards, then our yards could act as bridges to those natural spaces. Instead, what most of us have is about a gazillion of these really shallow rooted plants that we call grass or lawn. And they don't do anything to add to the ecosystem. In a natural environment, plants form relationships with soil microbes that grass can't form. Plants should capture the solar energy from the sun, also absorb CO2 that we've exhaled, and combine it with nutrients that are found in the soil. And that is how they make food, that they feed up the food chain. And so this is basically a good demonstration of what a healthy soil food web should look like. All those little things that live in the soil that help to make nutrients available to the roots of the plants. And then the plants are taking the sun and turning it into carbohydrates that they store in the roots for those nematodes, bacteria, protozoa, for all those microorganisms to feed on. So it's a nice relationship between the plant and the soil. And part of that is leaves. Leaves land, I should probably go back to that. Leaves land on the top of the soil here, and they're part of what gets broken down by the organisms that are in the soil. And they also provide cover to keep moisture in the soil and keep the temperature from shifting too dramatically. So leaves are really important, and not just for the ecosystem of the plants, but also for things that like to winter over in those leaves. So we've got polyphemus moth cocoons in there, little baby glowworms that are going to be a firefly someday, morning cloak butterflies, luna moth cocoons, not to mention salamanders, box turtles, all kinds of things that like to winter over there. So you can see why nature would consider lawns to be basically a green desert. We have about 40 million acres of lawn in the country. Some of the yards where I live are so expansive, you would think that we were doing like big outdoor sporting events on the regular. And the only time I ever see anybody out on those lawns is when they're mowing them. And lawns are really big contributors to toxicity in our environment. 4 hours of mowing the lawn is like, or 1 hour of mowing the lawn with a gas-powered mower is the same as 4 hours of driving the car as far as how much pollution it puts into the atmosphere. We use 800 million gallons of gas every year running lawn equipment, and every year we put about 100 million pounds of chemicals on our lawns. And those chemicals, our pets and our family walk on those, they track them into the house, they evaporate into the air, we breathe them in, they wash into groundwater, and they enter the waterways. And this is where we circle back to the amphibians. Why are amphibians at such a big risk? They're declining so rapidly too. It's because they absorb water through their skin. They're often the first to suffer the effects of pollution in the environment because they're so absorbent. Almost a third of the amphibians worldwide are actually threatened right now, and 168 species are already extinct. Amphibians are kind of like the canary in the coal mine. And I don't know if they still do this, but coal miners used to take canaries in a cage down into the coal mine with them when they would go down to the mines, because canaries were really sensitive to methane gas. So if the canary keeled over in the cage, the men knew to get out. And personally, I think that amphibians are basically the canaries in the coal mine. They're our environmental canaries. They're letting us know that the world is becoming more toxic. And they're also warning us basically about what those toxins can do to us. This slide's about air pollution, but no matter how toxins get into your body, they do increase the risk for all of these conditions that you see here. And I'm speaking from experience now because one of the most impactful things that I can do for clients is to detoxify them. You'd be amazed how many things can clear up when you detoxify someone. And why are toxins so harmful? It's because they poison enzymes. Enzymes are kind of like the spark plugs that run everything in our body, from detox pathways to making a hormone out of something else to repairing tissue. All of those things require enzymes. And when you have toxins in the system that are not being eliminated efficiently, then they'll block all those biochemical pathways. They damage DNA, which speeds up the aging process. They modify gene expression, which means that they're going to compromise not only our health, but also any future offspring. They displace minerals in the bone, which causes bone loss. And then as we age and we start to lose bone, then those toxins are liberated back into the system. And this is why a lot of times I'll see in women who are postmenopausal that they'll have a lot of more health conditions than they had before menopause, because that bone is breaking down and those toxins are liberating. They damage cell membranes, which interferes with cell signaling, and they also mess with receptors, either by mimicking something else or blocking or inducing things that normally would not happen. And the worst thing that they do is they inhibit your ability to get the toxins out of your system. And this is just showing that rates of all those things that are related to pollution are going up. But the good thing is that plants oxygenate and clean the air. Two large trees actually make enough oxygen for 4 people. So I think it's really cool that as plants breathe out, we breathe in. As we breathe out, they breathe in. It's a very cool symbiotic relationship. And there are many things that we need to do to change our course, but what I want to focus on tonight is a really fun and easy way to contribute to a healthier, less polluted environment. So this isn't what we're going to spend time on, but I included this slide because I thought it was kind of interesting. NASA did a study because they had a particular interest in sealed space stations, making them safe for the people that were sealed up in there, like keeping toxins down, but also providing oxygen. So they looked at different plants' ability to absorb toxins from the air and also to turn carbon dioxide into oxygen. And these were their top plants. So just kind of interesting. And indoor air can be just as toxic or even more toxic than outdoor air because we have all these materials that we've treated that off gas, and they can off gas for years, and we're breathing that in. So plants do more than clean the air, they can also clean the waterways. So this is a wetland, and we've lost 41%, I think it is. We've lost 41% of our wetlands. And we're losing the wetlands right now at 3 times the rate of forest deforestation. So that's really, really important for us to take interest in that. Also, plants can clean water that's like watershed off your roof, in your yard, the rain that comes down. There's a lot of chemicals that come down in rain because they're cleaning the air. You know, the water's cleaning the air as it comes down. So you'll see like jet fuel and things from industry in the air coming down. And rain gardens are a really cool way to help to manage your watershed from your roof, your driveway, your lawn, and also to purify it before it goes into the waterways. So aside from cleaning up the environment, air and water, there are other health benefits to being out in nature. Forest bathing is something that it originated in Japan, and they found in Japan that when people spent time in nature and they were just out there mindfully enjoying it, so not taking their phone and, texting or whatever, they're just actually immersed in the sounds, the smells, the sights, what they're hearing out there in nature. So that you can see that cancer killing cells are increased. So the immune system is upregulated. It lowers cortisol and anxiety, and it improves focus and cognition. And also people who spend time regularly in nature have lower blood pressure. Kids also benefit from being outside. Playing outside can improve motor strength, balance, and coordination. And it also contributes to cognitive, emotional, social, and educational development. I think it's important to teach kids about nature. And that's one of the things I want to get into out here with the nursery is doing some hands-on learning activities at some point. Right now, I'm still focused on infrastructure and figuring out what plant is what, but eventually I'd love to do that. I just remember when I was younger, we used to ride our bikes all day in the summer out in nature. We would take a lunch and we would stop by a creek and we would eat it and, look at the crawdads or the fish or the snake. We'd see snakes going down the stream. I just love doing stuff like that. But the thing is now, there's not that much green space. Green space isn't as convenient or easy to find, but if you cultivate it in your own yard, it's a really great way to increase the interest of children in your life, the children that would be exposed to that. And I think that's really important because they're our next generation of conservationists. So let's talk about some ways that we can make the best choices as we build in green space and invite nature back into our yards. That starts with having a deeper understanding of what nature needs in order to really thrive. And what nature really needs in order to thrive is food, water, shelter, a place to breed, and diversity. And I put insects in red because a lot of if we start allowing insects and even promoting them in our yards, that's a really great way to meet a lot of the needs of nature, because they're the little things that run the world. They take energy from plants and they pass it up the food chain. They pollinate 90% of the flowering plants on Earth, and flowering plants are where most berries and other fruits, nuts, and veggies come from. And some insects actually disperse seeds. I was surprised to learn recently that most of our spring ephemerals are seed dispersed by ants. They take the seed down into their underground burrows because there's I think it's called a cotyledon, but don't quote me on that. It's a little piece that's hanging off the seed that they want. They take that down there and chew it off to eat it. And that's like the little gift that the seed gives to the ant to get it where it needs to go, which is pretty cool. Insects also play a vital role in decomposing dead animal and plant matter, which will also eliminate disease-causing organisms and then release those nutrients back to the ground for growing plants. They're also the crucial first step, like we were talking about, how plants harvest energy from the sun, and the bugs eat those plants, and that turns them into very nutrient and calorie-rich foods that many of the creatures that we enjoy seeing are reliant upon. So today, what I want to focus on is pollinators and Lepidoptera. Lepidoptera are are moths and butterflies. If we garden for these, then we'll have a lot of, we don't have a lot of ecological traps in our yards, then we'll soon have thriving, balanced ecosystems in our yards. Pollinators will help produce more flowers and more plants. And just an FYI, our native bees are actually in a lot more trouble than honeybees. There's nothing wrong with having honeybees, but actually our native pollinators need our help the most. So one of the things that Talamy talks about a lot in his books, and I think he's basically the one that kind of brought this all to all of our attention, is that most of the insects are actually specialists. And that means that they have co-evolved with plants, with specific plants, and they can only eat those plants. So either one specific plant or a few plants that have related chemical compounds in the leaves. Monarchs are a really good example of that. They can only feed on milkweed. And the little caterpillars to the right there that you see, those are spicebush swallowtails. I fell in love with them last year in the nursery. We don't use any chemicals here, so I got to see a lot of really cool caterpillars last year on some of the plants I was raising. And when the spicebush swallowtail caterpillars came and I put it on my Facebook page, all the spice bushes sold out. Everyone got to take home a caterpillar. It was really cool. But I wanted to say too, the green of the caterpillar is when it's younger, and right before it turns into a cocoon, it will turn bright orange. It's really cool to see. So native plants are how we can feed the insects that nature relies on. They're what native insects have co-evolved with, and they're more adapted to our soils. They don't require special fertilizer. They don't require special care once they're established. Most will need to be caged because, just like anything else, the deer want to eat them. The goal is basically 70%. So Talamy says that studies that they've done show that if you have 70% natives in your yard, then that's enough for a functional and diverse ecosystem. And then you also want to think about the diversity in the native plants that you are putting in your yard. It's always best to put plants in your yard that are raised from seeds versus cuttings, because the seeds are genetically diverse. Cuttings are all genetically identical to the original plant. They call that cloning. Cultivars of natives are often not as beneficial as the straight natives were. And we're going to talk about a couple of things that will make those cultivars not as beneficial. three things we know for sure affect the usefulness of a native plant, and we may learn more things as we keep studying this. But bloom shape and size is one thing, because many pollinators have actually co-evolved their mouth parts to be able to access the nectar and pollen inside specific flowers. And I think it's really cool how these insects have evolved to be in the right place, like the plant is actually producing the nectar or the pollen right when that specific pollinator needs that to procreate. So, and that's why you want to try to get plants that are as close to the area where you live in as possible, because the timing of those plants will match up with the timing of the insects in your area. We talked about lack of genetic diversity. Most cultivars are propagated from cuttings, not from seeds, because they're selected for specific traits, and there's no guarantee that their offspring will carry on those specific traits. So they clone the plant so that they maintain those specific characteristics that they're looking for. And when plants are not as genetically diverse, they're more vulnerable to pests and severe weather and things like that. So with climate change, that's really critical. Leaf color is especially a problem if you turn a green leaf into red. I always think of the red bud tree, because what a great idea to turn red bud leaves red. But then when you do that, the anthocyanins that are in the leaf are what gives it the red color. And those are, the anthocyanins are a feeding deterrent that plants have developed to keep their leaves from being eaten. So a butterfly may lay her eggs on a red-leafed red bud, but when the caterpillars hatch out, they will not be able to eat the leaves. And you can tell actually a native, straight native versus a nativar, which is just another word for cultivar, by the extra words that are behind it. So for instance, if you have Monarda fistulosa, which is a straight native, but after that name it says like Claire Grace or something like that, then that means that it's a cultivar. And so that means it's been tampered with. Even if you don't change the shape of the bloom, when you tinker with plants, you do run the risk of lowering the amount of nectar or pollen that flower would produce. So let's talk about birds and what they need to reproduce, because now we know what kinds of plants we're looking at. We want to look at natives. We want to kind of circle back and start thinking about how do we choose plants? What kind of criteria do we use to make the best selections for our yards? So over 90% of our nesting birds cannot feed their nestlings from your bird feeder unless you're putting out live worms. They can't feed nuts, seeds, or berries to their babies. So they do need insects. Insects have a lot more fat and protein, and insects aren't all created equally either. So you need to think about this. If you had 4 or 5 hungry mouse that you had to feed about 50 times a day, would you choose something that was kind of like a hot dog, or would you choose something that was more like a pepperoni? And of course you would choose the hot dog. And to be clear, as a natural healthcare practitioner, I am not promoting the eating of processed meats, but basically caterpillars are the hot dogs in nature. They're nature's hot dogs. They're basically soft, squishy bags full of fat, protein, and dense nutrition. They're really easy to stuff down a baby bird's throat when you're on the fly. And they're also easy to carry multiple in your bill. And they'll add up a lot more quickly than spiders, flies, gnats, and other insects. And they don't fly, so they're a lot easier to catch. So we want to think about what plants would make the most caterpillars. And those would be the keystone plants. And this is something that Talamy talks about quite extensively in his books and videos. So I'm just going to skip right into just talking about which ones are the keystone plants. For the woody plants and the perennials, I've listed the top 6, and these can be found if you're not in our area. This is for Central Ohio. If you're not in this area, you can look at nwf.org and look for a native plant finder and put your zip code in, and it'll give you the top plants for your area that feed caterpillars. So for the nursery, definitely I have focused on the top of the woody plants. And I've brought in some perennials this year, focusing on the lot in the top few. I'm still waiting to see what everything that's grown out. But basically, for like oak trees, you can see that oak trees produce, well, they feed 477 different species of Lepidoptera. And most of the ones that feed on oaks are actually moths, which is kind of interesting. That's something I learned from Talamy's newest book, which I just got that the other day. I haven't read it all because I've been working on my presentation, but great book. Highly recommend it. What I like about his book is that he goes through each month of the year and tells you what you will see basically happening on your oak tree. So it tells you what to look for in every month of the year. He considers them the most essential native tree because they provide so many ecosystem services, which we'll talk about. And then I want to say too, on the sunflowers over to the right, that the sunflowers, which are listed here on the right, that feed 76 different species of Lepidoptera. Those are not the typical sunflowers that you think of, although those are great too because they're wonderful for attracting goldfinches. I love them. But we're talking about our native sunflowers. So that would be like sawtooth sunflower, stiff-haired sunflower, downy sunflower, ox-eyed sunflower, that type of thing. And absolutely, Gail at Natives in Harmony is going to be your best bet for looking for those perennials. It'll take a while for me to get those up and running. I only have a few things here this year. But we do have a lot of, I ordered a lot of the different woody plants that you see there that are the top of the list. And oak trees, I just wanted to talk a little bit about them. Because they do provide so many ecosystem benefits, they have enormous root systems. In fact, I was reading how they had uncovered the root system of an oak that was several hundred years old. And the root system extended 3 times further than the canopy, which is just amazing. They're champions when it comes to soil stabilization, carbon sequestration, and watershed management. They're also slow growing, but the reason they are is because they have a really deep taproot that they put down right away, which means that they're much more quick to establish and not need your watering efforts. And once they are established, which takes them about 2 years, then they grow at a moderately fast rate, most of them. Talamy was talking about a tree that he had in his yard that was 18 years old and it was 45 feet tall. So, and he planted it from an acorn. And honestly, that really is the best way to plant an oak is from an acorn because they put that taproot down really quick and they don't get disturbed. The oak trees that we have here in the nursery are all first and second year seedlings. They do not like being in pots. They don't look happy there and they just want to be planted right away. So, and we also have 12 different kinds of oaks that are native to our area, which is really cool. So then second on the list was the Prunus, which is the plum and the cherry. We have American plum and black cherry tree here because if you remember back, those feed 381 different species of Lepidoptera, which is a lot. And then they also have berries for the birds and flowers for the pollinators, and they're fast growing. They're also both beautiful trees. So when you're starting to build in your native habitat in your yard, you want to think about putting in trophic layers because there are different types of wildlife that prefer to live in the different areas. Some live down in the leaf litter or low in the bushes. Some live in understory trees a little bit higher up, and some like to be all the way up in the canopy like walking sticks. One of the reasons you hardly ever see a walking stick is because they really love the highest parts of the canopy. So when you find them down lower, they're usually a little bit lost. And then leaves, we talked about leaves and how important it is to leave the leaves, not only for building the soil, but also for things to hide in. So just a few things I thought would be kind of cool would be to give you some ideas for how to hold those leaves in place, but also show what they call cues of care. So it doesn't look like you just didn't care and you just didn't rake your leaves. It looks like they're there purposefully. So I love this low wattle fencing. A Facebook friend had posted something on his page where he had done that. in his yard. And I just thought it was really cool. And that made it look like, it was intentional. And it also kept the leaves from blowing away, which I think is another thing. If you've got lawn all around it, even if you're not collecting your leaves, they do tend to kind of get blown around, which does disturb the habitat for the little critters that are trying to overwinter there. And then bushes, if you're using those trophic layers we talked about, the leaves tend to kind of fall and stay put with the bushes. The bushes will kind of anchor them there and also provide a little bit of extra cover. And then you also want to avoid ecological traps in your yard, because ecological traps are kind of places where animals get stuck and they can't survive. Something that causes its demise. Window wells are really notorious for that. They are deep and they're hard for little, especially babies, animals to get out of. So putting a branch across, a wide branch across, so that they have a way to climb out is important, or covering them up so that nothing can get in there. Outdoor lighting is another hazard or an ecological trap for wildlife, because, and we don't know why they do this, but moths will just go right for the light and they'll bang themselves to death on the light instead of reproducing like we want them to. And then bug zappers are another one. I actually had a bug zapper here until I read Talamy's book, and I immediately, it wasn't 3 a.m., but it was right away. I came out and I took that down and I threw it in the trash. I didn't even give it to somebody else because I didn't want them to use it. But bug zappers they're luring the bugs in and killing them, and then they're not able to reproduce or feed wildlife. And then there's also native plants that are sprayed. So a caterpillar will hatch out on a plant that's native, and if it's been sprayed, then they die right away. They can't grow to full size and pupate. And then another ecological trap would be non-native landscapes, where, like I've actually, last year was my big invasive removal year. I removed 3 giant burning bushes, and each one of those burning bushes took an hour of someone else's time and an hour and a half of my time to pull all the root systems out. Those root systems were crazy. Anybody that says that non-native plants don't have deep root systems has not dug out a burning bush. But burning bushes, honeysuckle, autumn olive, Callery pear, those are some of our worst. Garlic mustard's really bad. Those are all not just invasive and not feeding the food chain, but they're also blocking out, especially honeysuckle. They block out native plants from growing. They leaf out earlier than the natives do, and they hold their leaves longer than the natives do. So they block the natives that are in the seed bank from photosynthesizing. And so eventually you end up losing those. But sometimes when you pull those out, you actually start to see native plants coming in. So those are things that you want to think about, is, removing the invasives. It's okay to have non-natives if they're not invasive. Excuse the noise in the background. There must be farm equipment going by. And there's lots of people that will say that removing invasives, you can't use any chemicals. I think that that's a case-by-case basis, because I have 10 acres here and I don't even know how I would get them all out if I didn't stump treat some of the deeper rooted things that I just can't get them out. So that's kind of an area of controversy. But I do only use that when I absolutely have to. Otherwise, like the burning bushes, I spent an hour and a half, like I said, digging those out. So that was basically what I had for today. This is the first time I've given this talk. I'm sorry if I was a little bit nervous, but I hope that the information that I gave was helpful. But I'll let you take back over, Jessica.
All right, thank you. So we are having some emails sent, and Marty reminds me that Jennifer Windus will be the speaker for this series in October, and I believe she is talking about invasive plants.
Oh, great.
There are some links on there, but for native plants, and also there was Doug Ptolemy recorded something for OSU, Partners for Pollinators, and that link is on there. And one question from Kathy, does anybody have any suggestions on what will outcompete lesser celandine that's spreading through central Ohio?
I have heard that native strawberry is a thug when it comes to outcompeting invasives, but I have not actually worked with that yet. I tried to order some and they were sold out everywhere. I'm not sure if anybody else has any other suggestions.
One of the new things in the chat. So there's a group called the Ohio Invasive Plant Council, and they not only have lists of Ohio invasive plants. So if you're wondering if what you're looking at is an invasive plant, there is a list on this site. But also, they will help create groups and like get a group of people together and go pull honeysuckle out of Sharon Woods, like that kind of thing. So if
I
you
heard
want,
about that. That's really cool.
yeah, my sister does that all the time. She's like, I was in Northeast Ohio pulling honeysuckle. But yeah, so there are a lot of opportunities. So if you're not sure how you can help beyond your own yard, there are active volunteer opportunities for both planting and pulling in Ohio using these.
I happen to live in strawberry farms.
Mm.
And evidently, this was a place that grew strawberries. And so, in my side garden, the strawberry plant just comes. And at first, I would pull it out, but I've learned that it's a good ground cover to keep the weeds out of the garden. And so, I let it stay there. But doesn't mean that invasive things. But here's a question that Pachysandra, I'm having trouble getting rid of it because it just goes everywhere.
That's awful.
But I guess I just have to keep pulling it up. But that's all my comment. Thank you. I've enjoyed your talk very much.
Thank you. One of the things that I found works really well too is putting cardboard down and then putting mulch on top of it and leaving it through a couple of seasons. And then you can actually, the cardboard starts to break down and you can cut a hole in it and plant through, and leave that cover there to kind of keep things blotted out so that you can get your natives established. That's a really good way to do it too.
Mm-hmm.
I have 10 acres here, so it's just not always practical in some of the areas that I'm trying to replace. I'm trying to replace all the grass.
Right. And Marty mentions that native plants designs don't necessarily look unkempt. So one thing that I would mention, pure library plug here, but there are a lot of books in the library about landscaping with native plants or with food that you eat or things other than just grass. So there are Ohio specific books in the library, and if you know of one that we don't own, you can suggest anything to the library for us to buy. So if you ever knew of a resource and we don't have it, please let us know because, at that point, you guys are the resource for us.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody mentioned that in that series that Doug Ptolemy mentioned, there's also a lot of entomologists in there. So if you like hearing about the bugs portion, it's in there. Somebody asked, does Westerville have a garden club? Yes, they do. There's Westerville, Amherst. There are a couple of other local area garden clubs. If anybody who is on here right now is a member of a local garden club and would like to speak up or type it in the chat, please let us know. Marty says a great free resource for download is Native Plants for the Small Yard by Kate Brandis. It includes sample designs and great chart listing plant requirements. That's great. I would caution everybody, if you live in a housing development, you may want to check with your homeowners association because in some cases, certain plants are actually banned, which is usually nice because those usually tend to be the invasive ones that they're trying to keep out. But make sure to double check.
That's nice. I hadn't heard that before.
Let's see. Can you recommend resources for designing landscape with natives in mind?
I really love Doug Tallamy's book with Rick Dark. He talks about how to choose plants, like pairing plants. Like one of the things I thought was a really good aha from that book. I haven't even read it all, but there's a lot of good tips just in the first few, like 20 pages. He's talking about how you take bushes and trees and think about when the tree leaves out and pair that bush that maybe leaves out first so that it gets a good chance to photosynthesize before the tree leaves out. So just thinking about things like that, kind of cool. I know Marty Frida was telling me about a book that is about landscaping with natives in small yards. I have it on my list to get. I don't remember the name of it.
Okay, I am going to take over the screen share for a second and go to the interwebs. So here's some of the Doug Ptolemy books that we were speaking. What was the one you were just mentioning?
The Living Landscape.
Okay, so that one.
Mhm.
Okay, but also, so let's go to the library real quick. And if you did not know, the Westerville Library is part of two consortiums, OhioLink, not that one, sorry, OhioLink and Search Ohio. So if we don't have something, we can still get it. So even if like we can't buy it, say the book is great, but it's old, it may not actually be available. So if we do, so here's a search for native landscaping and view books. So we've got these, and here is a trick, because if it looks like there aren't a lot of hits, if you click on one and it takes you to the catalog, the way to cheat is if you scroll down a little bit and look under the subject heading, you start seeing other words that you may not have thought to look for, how it's described, like natural landscaping instead of, animal-plant relationships, that kind of thing. And then when you click on those, it'll flat out bring up the lists. So it is a good way to, if you can't figure out how to put it in words, or you don't know the words because you haven't read the book yet, this is a good way to find them. And see some of the one, there's Doug coming up all the time.
I highly recommend all of his books.
Yeah.
They're just so well written.
Yeah. And then again, here is the, so you notice there are 9 under the specific one, but if I click on Search Ohio, it then searches all the surrounding libraries as well that are a member of Search Ohio that you can have sent directly to the library. So you are not out of luck if we don't have it. Some other recommendations for the garden clubs. So yes, there's a Westerville Garden Club, and it says they have a butterfly garden at Polaris and Africa Road. Good to know. And Annhurst Garden Friends is the name of another. All right, does anyone have any other questions or comments or resources that you'd like to share?
I'd like to make one final comment. I meant to include in my talk that you don't want to just stick with the keystone plants. You also want to look at a lot of diversity in plants in your yard.
Okay, I did have a question. I am not familiar with caging plants.
Oh, okay.
What is that?
Well, I basically find the cheapest stakes that I can. Right now, I've been using from TSC. They're $1.88, I think, and they're red and they have a little flange at the bottom, and I just stick those in, and then I take fencing and cut it into the size that I need to go around the plant, and then I just weave it in to that post. I should have put a picture in there. That's a good thing to do next time, to show. I guess I've just done it for so long, I didn't think about explaining it. But yeah, those cages can be reused over and over and over again. And you just have to go around. I usually go around once or twice in the winter and push them back in because they'll start to heave out as the ground freezes and thaws. But yeah, those work really well.
Okay, I have old tomato cages. Could I use those?
Well, the tomato cages don't block them from getting their head in there. They can still get in between. I have found that tomato cages will deter a little bit. Another thing that I've learned is that when you have like a pine tree, you know how pine trees keep getting fatter, they keep outgrowing their cage. I've learned that if you take bamboo stakes and just push them down in at different angles, the deer don't like to run up against those sharp edges. And they're not really trying to eat the pine trees. They're just trying to get the velvet off their antlers or scratch themselves. I'm not sure, but they basically maul them. They don't eat them. But if those posts are sticking in there like that, they don't like that. They leave those alone. So you don't really have to cage those.
Okay. All right, I'm keeping an eye on chat. Nothing else has come up. All right, well, Patty, thank you so much. This is very interesting. We very much appreciate it.
Well, thanks for including me. Thanks for listening, everyone. Go plant native.
All right, good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.